Absolutely not. I don't care. You need to say it right there.
All right, howdy everyone.
Howdy.
That's Texas stuff.
Yeah, that's Aggie talk.
Aggie talk.
Yes. My name is Ann Shu. I'm the Assistant Director for Technology at CAR-T, the Center for Advancing Research in Transportation Emissions, Energy, and Health. We're very excited today to have you all here to join us for Dr. Jane Macfarlane's seminar on big data solutions for mobility planning. On the surface, it may not seem like it has much to do with health, but one of the things is the center's mission, is to break down silos between transportation and health so we can solve big problems. And the key to breaking down disciplinary silos is to break down data silos and to harness the power of big data. And today we have, Jane is going to talk about her work, her leading edge work on big data solutions in mobility planning. And Jane Macfarlane is the Director of Smart Cities and Sustainable Mobility at the University of California, Berkeley. She has over 30 years of experience in high performance computing, data analytics, and geospatial mapping. And she's really legendary. She has many titles, many experiences, both on the academia and the industry. She was the chief scientist and head of research for HERE, a leader in geospatial mapping. She was vice president of process engineering at Imara, a lithium-ion battery company, and director of advanced technology planning for OnStar at General Motors. Currently, she is leading a DOE national lab effort across 3 national labs focused on the use of high-performance computing and big data in transportation systems. Jane has authored over 26 patents, and she holds a PhD in mechanical engineering from University of Minnesota. So, Jane, take it away, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me here, and thank you for inviting me, Ann. So this is, I'm going to talk about a project that we've been working on for just a couple of years. So it's a very, very new project that just got started. It's a 3-year project across 3 national labs supported by the Department of Energy, Eames office. And so my focus today is on data science, artificial intelligence, and high performance computing. So we're putting those 3 kind of approaches together to take a new look at transportation systems. So there's no question that as a society, we're going through this cyber-physical transformation happening. I took this picture of someone walking into IKEA where they both had their phones in their hands. Even though they had pockets and bags, they had their phones in their hands because we can't go anywhere without our digital devices anymore. We're using them in a lot of places, but we shouldn't be using them. I did a drive to the airport one time. I was not driving, and I took photos of people using their phone in their car, and I had 10 photos by the time I got to the airport, which is very discouraging given that I started at the first part of OnStar, which was all focused on safety. And so I don't know that we're going the right direction these days. But nonetheless, these digital devices are part of our world. And what we have now is we have this convergence of bandwidth, network ubiquity, mobile devices and IoT devices, and then big data analytics. So when I was working for OnStar, we had all that information in the car and we couldn't unlock it because we had no network to get it up into a cloud infrastructure. But that's all changed now. So what we have is this kind of intersection of technology into government and society. And it's kind of breaking our social contracts. And this is a picture I took in my neighborhood where someone is commenting on the new micromobility services that are being delivered out there. And so we've got this disruption going on in mobility. some of which people like, some of which people don't, and some of it which is not thought through very well. I am not making a comment on scooters, but scooters are hot right now. So. But I think a really important thing is that we've become an on-demand society. So that's a fundamental change on what we're doing. So Uber kind of did that. I want my ride and I want it here right now. This was San Francisco's fault because it was really hard to get a cab in San Francisco in the old days. They didn't offer enough medallions. And so thus spawned Uber, Lyft, and the disruption in that whole environment. And a lot of taxi businesses are out of business now. So they have definitely disrupted that industry. Furthermore, Amazon has now got us to the point where we want our soap powder delivered on our porch the very next day, and we are delivering packages daily at people's houses. So things are definitely being disrupted. So what does that mean? So now we have all this data coming from all those mobile devices. So that's geospatial temporal data that's coming out of smartphones, vehicles, IoT devices. We've got vehicles coming that will have GPS, will have LiDAR, will have cameras. So all of this data is being generated. So now we're in the new world of big data analytics. These are images of Boston, New York, of DC, and Atlanta. You can see how really rich this data is. This is speed data. Colored red is slow, blue is fast. So it gives us a lot of information, but it's a huge amount of data that has to be absorbed. Cars are coming with all kinds of data. Potentially, this is an old slide. It's a marketing slide, but it's an interesting point of this is they're saying 25% of the vehicle's energy is going to be used generating all this data. So now we have an energy problem that comes with it. And then it goes to the cloud, which is more. So we have an energy problem wrapped around this big data problem. I just want to go very quickly for those of you that have not worked with this data, what this data looks like. So because of GPS, urban canyon effects, this is downtown San Francisco, GPS data, it's really good data. It looks horrible, but it's really good data, right? And we were actually using it to find where we thought the center lines of the streets were. You see this big blob up there? That's where all the AT&T trucks go into at the end of the day when they're done servicing things. So it's a big blob of data right in the middle of all of this. There's those little green lines. That's just junk in the middle of the big data. So data veracity becomes a big issue. So these are slides, old slides that I have, but they show some of the fun facts of big data. Big data is usually sourced. You don't get one source of all of this data, so you get all these different kinds of sources. And what I like to say is there's no bottom of the universe for big data, because it's all IoT devices. I don't know anything about those devices, right? So they come from all these different places, and they have all these different characteristics. Here's an example of a source inside of all my GPS data, where it's all clumped up data. I have no idea why that data is all clumped up. It's just one source did that. Another source map matched it to the map. I don't know what map they matched it to. They shouldn't have done that. Another source dropped a significant bit on the GPS, so it gridded it. Another source, I don't know. I don't know what happened here. There's a big old rectangle in the middle of this data. This data looks pretty good. But if you were doing your data analytics inside here, you'd have no idea that that is garbage. And it would take you a lot of time to figure out that you had junk. Here's another great example where we have three different providers here. So the yellow provider looks like they have good data. It's just in the wrong part of the world. Right? The red provider looks kind of maybe good data, except for they got these really straight lines in there. And then the green provider is just junk. All intermixed in a big bucket of data that you get to do your analytics on. It's very rich data. You can tell a lot from this data. This was New Year's Day, when everybody else is basically home watching football games and things. There's all this activity in Texas and up in Nebraska, and it turns out that's the fracking industry at that time. So there's a lot of really interesting information in it. This was a video that I showed that shows when they did automated toll taking at the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. So what a great story here. All those emissions now gone, right? But I couldn't get the Golden Gate Bridge Authority to use this. I said, this tells the story right here of what you did for our environment here. So lots of information in it. This is an example of data that came from the CAN bus on taxis going through a curve in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And we were able to start to understand what the g-force, the lateral acceleration was as vehicles went through that curve. So that will tell you what basically the safe speed is to go through that curve. Could I go through it faster with an automated vehicle? Probably. But people, over all the people going through there, settled out at one kind of g-force acceleration pattern, which means that's what we feel comfortable driving through that curve with. We could also tell where they started braking. And it was different from one side than the other direction. So if you're building automated vehicles, this information can be really valuable for building AVs that people actually want to ride. So lots of really good information in this data. That's CAN bus data. I won't focus in on it, but you can see how complex the data is, though. It doesn't all just pop right out of you. Significant analytics have to be done to start to understand really what we do on the road networks. More examples of that kind of information. Here you can see where people are braking as they come to the stop sign. Here you can see where people are braking to allow these folks to come onto the freeway. So lots, as I said, lots of information in there that's very valuable. But as I said, the veracity is a big deal. This is a GPS trace for a vehicle in Eindhoven. And I was looking for hard braking and fast accelerations, and this popped out in my visualization. And I said, I do not think that's right. So what I think is this is probably IDs of two vehicles that were merged. So I had two vehicles with the same ID, or I had a time-shifted GPS trace from the same vehicle. So it's garbage. This one's easy to figure out because cars can't fly yet, but it was easy to figure out, but imagine if it's more subtle. So this whole notion of data veracity in big data is really a huge problem, and I don't think we've conquered it yet. But as I said, very rich data to be had, so we should try to work that out. This is an example of how we figured out whether gas stations exist or not, if they're active.
In your experience, what's the fraction of the garbage in the data?
It varies. My experience is maybe 10%, which is not small. There is the theory of the garbage washes out, but if you don't know that what the garbage looks like, you don't know if all of your data is garbage, right? So you've got to know the difference between the garbage and the good. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges. So this is an example of how you can use this data to figure out where people hang out. You can find out, this is the city of Eindhoven again. These are all images courtesy of here, where people, this is the city center. You can start to understand where the coffee shops are, where the restaurants are. You can learn a lot about how people behave and where people cluster. Map matching becomes a big deal in this. For those of you who have not done map matching, GPS has to be matched to a map for a variety of reasons. Sometimes you don't need to, but very often you do. Map matching is a very complex algorithm. Don't write one yourself. Go get one off the that's already been tested. But you can see we did testing of map matching algorithms at here. The green points are the location of the vehicle itself. It had a IMU in it, so I knew exactly where that vehicle was. And the red points are GPS points from a device that's located in the vehicle. So they're off. I know he's right there. Here you can see the map matcher doing just fine. It knows it's on that freeway. It pops over to this. This, I think, was an example. This is a bike path underneath or a tiny little road underneath the freeway. So the map matcher got confused, popped it over there, stayed there for a while, figured it out, and came back and eventually realized that he actually was on this freeway the whole time. But you can get into pretty sophisticated map matching algorithms to try to sort these things out. So if you're doing that in real time, that can be quite a challenge. One of the questions that I always like to ask when we're collecting data, does the big data have to be big? So there are, people go out and they put a sampling period into a device arbitrarily. You can tell by where you're operating. The road network has inherent characteristics to it. You can tell by where you're operating what your sampling period needs to be. So we need to get better at doing intelligent sampling based on, like if I have a fleet that only operates in this certain area, then don't set your sampling period to 1 second because you don't need all that information. You can get it at a much better, a higher sampling period. And that's kind of the Shannon's theory kind of applied to road networks. Again, veracity on the other side is all this, imagery is got shadows, it's got all that fun stuff. This is a photogrammetry imagery where they flew over the top of these buildings, and the shadows of the buildings completely mess up your analytics. And you'll see all kinds of that. LiDAR is focused on creating a point space, points in space. It's giant clouds of points with centimeter accuracy, and you have to do feature extraction on that to find the edges in that data. This is an example from the HERE work. It was a long time ago, but the whole notion of feature extraction is taking these LiDAR point clouds, taking out the stuff that you don't care about. In our case, we're looking at reflective surfaces on the road network, so we got rid of all of those pesky trees, and then you start focusing in on those reflective surfaces and trying to define what the lane marking looks like. And as you go through the intersection, you see it all goes dark. So the idea here is that the complexity of all this work on that data is really high, and that's what's coming in automated vehicles and the like. We're putting billions of investment in the AVs and the HD maps. The LiDAR goes into the HD map. There's a whole body of work focused on how do you build HD maps and bring in current information into that HD map. That's a whole topic into itself. So all of this work is being done. This is a really interesting article that was in ACM Communications, focused on this big data issue, is that we're using now machine learning techniques to manage these big data feature extraction problems. And this gentleman, he's in Australia somewhere, took the Baidu software system and the LiDAR points that go into it and introduced random points in these giant point clouds outside of the localization field of view. And with those random points, you can lose a vehicle or you can lose a pedestrian. So that shows you how brittle this software is that's being looked at in this big data evolution that's happening. So the question, obviously, that DOE is starting to ask about is we have all these disruptions coming with Ubers and drones and deliveries and all these different things, what's going to be the impact? And we really have no idea. So that's the focus. And so now we have all these tipping points in transportation and mobility, big data. Privacy is now a huge problem because all of this GPS data comes from you, if you're giving it away freely. And so then we have the privacy issue, which is going to come in a big way in the next few years. And then on top of that, then we have the cybersecurity piece. If I can introduce 1,000 random points in your point cloud, and you can lose a vehicle, that's a little bit of a worry. So how do we manage all that going forward? So now I want to talk about the high performance computing. So I touched on the big data, all the fun stuff that you have to deal with when you get into the big data world. For those of you that haven't done a lot of work in big data. And so now let's bring in the high performance computing piece. So big data solutions for mobility is a project focused on trying to take automated ingestion of real world data and then inform simulations with that data. So instead of building a synthetic world in my simulation, I want to be able to have this simulation be data driven from real world data. We are partnering with Connected Corridor, which is a corridor in Los Angeles on the I-210. It's a 14 by 4 mile corridor being instrumented by Caltrans. Actually, it's being instrumented by the cities along that corridor. There's like 5 cities involved. Caltrans is supporting it by creating an environment where all of this data from this connected corridor goes up into the AWS cloud so that we can start to monitor it. I-210 has about 6 events a day, 6 crashes of some kind a day. There's a lot of people on it all the time. And so they want to know, what do I do when an event occurs? How do I channel people off the highway onto the arterials? How do I change the signals to get those people through that arterial and back on the freeway down below? So that's the whole focus of the Connected Corridor area. So what we're trying to do is take a look at that data, try to inform our new simulation approaches with data, real world data. And then we want to put it on high performance computing so that we don't have the computational restrictions that you typically have in the simulation world when you get into these kinds of simulations. By simulation here, I am talking urban scale. So it's not a small chunk of LA. We want to do the entire LA basin in our simulation, down to the residential level, not a simplified highway network, using the entire road network. Why? Because that's what we're doing today. When you turn your nav app and it takes you through a residential neighborhood, that's what they're doing. They're making the most use of the network that they can to get you where you want to go. So I want to be able to do the entire urban scale area, and I want to do it because I'd like to know what kind of actionable control could we do in this urban scale environment. So I have a resource and a demand on that environment. How best do I manage that resource, the road network? So I'm jump right to the punchline here. As I said, it's only 2 years old, but we were able to do a full urban scale simulation for the Bay Area, 22 million trip legs that were defined by the SFCTA. We can, with active routing, that's dynamic routing, so that the vehicles are actually making decisions every few minutes on what a better route would be. We can run the entire simulation in 3 minutes, which is phenomenal. So we can introduce events, we can look at the impact of active routing and determine what the cost of that active routing is. You have extra vehicle miles traveled, but your productivity, you're not spending all that time in traffic. That I just talked about. I want to get to at some point is because the simulation can generate data at that every 3 minutes or whatever for a full 24-hour period, that means I can create all kinds of synthesized data. If I have synthesized data, then I could potentially use machine learning to learn the characteristics of this network. So then I could potentially build surrogate models for the dynamics of what happens in this network, take it off the supercomputer architecture, and deliver it to a planner's desk. So that's kind of the vision. I don't know if we can do that. That's why we call it research. So I'm not sure, but I would like to think that that's a possibility. That would allow planners to change the demand profiles and all kinds of do scenario planning daily. We also took the same kind of approach and applied it to traffic assignment. So a lot of planners use traffic assignment for understanding the demands on their networks. The city of San Francisco, for example, takes that 22 million trip leg model and does 5-hour, 4-hour, I believe, traffic assignment, static traffic assignment for the day. Takes them about a day and a half or 2 days to do that. So we took that on and we were able to get the compute time down to 5 hours for what they were doing. One of the things that we did is we did different kinds of optimization. So traffic assignment, if you're familiar with it, does a travel time optimization. So we introduced a fuel optimization, a system level optimization, and a system level fuel optimization so that we could see if we optimize differently, where does it shift the traffic to? Interestingly enough, we just wrote a TRB paper on this, that if you optimize based on fuel, it actually pushes out people out onto the arterials. And so now there are some concerns about what would be the equity implications of that, because it pushes you out off the freeways onto the arterials, which is where people live, and they're generally low-income people who live next to the freeways. So the exciting part about that is literally we just tuned that, and if we have it parallelized on 16 nodes of our supercomputer Quasi, we did it for the Los Angeles basin, the whole Los Angeles basin, with 40 million trip legs, with 2-hour time segments, and we can run it in 10 minutes, which is amazing. This particular approach is what we're calling quasi-dynamic traffic assignment. So what we do is we do 1 hour or 2 hours. So what we do is we set the demand, we do a traffic assignment, then we put it in the simulation that I talked about earlier, let the simulation run for 2 hours, then we take the residual demand from those 2 hours, add the new demand in, and step the simulation forward. So that's our approach to it. We haven't documented that in a paper, but it's coming. But 10 minutes is pretty phenomenal. When I say I want it to be informed by real world data, this is the kind of data that I'm getting right now. I get about 56 million GPS points per day from the LA basin. Just a quick note, one thing that I have found by working with this kind of data is you need an extremely disciplined process to working with the data, because particularly I have students, and students are wonderful, they're very creative, but they are very haphazard, and all of a sudden they will give you a data set and you say, where did it come from? What did you do to it? Where's the derivation of this data set? And so I have built, this is a Ruby gem. I write all my code in Ruby because I was a Lisper in the AI days. And what this framework is for doing very definitive steps on your data. And it allows you to take little baby steps right through your data. You start with raw data, tiny step, tiny step, tiny step. Does threading on your own computer. So you don't need a supercomputer to do this. You can do it on your own machine at home. And then it allows you to kind of back up if you realize you've made a mistake on one little piece of code, and it will regenerate automatically for you. So very disciplined approach. It allows you, it's a scripting approach. So it allows you to use the Unix tools. It allows you to write Python, Ruby, whatever you like, and build your own pipeline. That way you have, it also manages the history of that data so that you can look at the data set and you can look at exactly what was done to that data set. And so this is a really key part of working with big data. So we're using that today, and this is an example. We say, you know, this is a single step. You unzip the file, you split the files, you add the local time to the file, and you just boom, 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 boom. And then you know the provenance of all your data, which is super important. This is data that I just got. This is, once again, the joys of big data. I've got flying cars in the middle of my data, right? So again, this is obvious that these are bad data points, but other ones are not so obvious. So if you have not noticed already, visualization is your friend. Every data set must be visualized first. You don't do any steps without doing visualization in this process. Otherwise, you lose your way very quickly. So that was just an example of, this is actually the I-210 area of Los Angeles that I was looking at. So we had some good junk inside of that.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you use any specific visualization toolkit for visualizing?
I use Kepler.gl a lot, and then here has a couple of GL2s out there too. They're harder to use, but Kepler is really nice. You can just drop it in there. And the one that you just saw, that's QGIS. But every tool has its own. Kepler's not good at GeoJSON yet. They'll probably make it better, but it doesn't interpret GeoJSON very well. The here tools, I think, do. And QGIS is really cool because you can just slop it in there really quick and just get a quick view. So it depends on what you're trying to do. So next piece is sensor data modeling. So this is work done by Argonne National Lab. So the challenge with, we started with the PEMS, inductive loop data. And the challenge with sensors, obviously, is that they have non-Euclidean geometry, right? So what happens on the eastbound is very different than what happens on the westbound, even though they're spatially right next to each other, right? So you've got to include the notion of the graph in how you think about this data. So you've got to have some mechanism to encode the road network graph. So what we did is we took the PEMS data and we trained on the PEMS data of all the inductive loops in all of California. So for this one, that's like 600 loops, inductive loops there. We used a diffusion convolution recurrent neural net, which is a, the diffusion convolution part is kind of the graph piece, and then the neural net part is the learning piece. And so the graph of this highway network is embedded in the DC part, and then the neural net learns that. And our goal was to predict speed and flow on the inductive loop data. So we did that. The supercomputer piece of this is a hyperparameter search that allows you to tune the DCRNN. So there's a tool at Aragon that they use for doing these tuning operations, where you can take all this data, tune your neural net to get one that works well. So this was the output of that. This was 162 loop detectors there, and this is the speed, this is the flow on that loop, on one of the loops, for 60 minutes prediction. And so we got really good response with that, and same with the speeds. We can now do all 11,000 plus detectors on the highway network with this neural net. And we can predict out for all 11,000 1 hour in the future and do a pretty good job. We're usually at around 3 miles per hour. We do that by partitioning the network out and running it through. Our next, this is the data-driven piece of this. So our next goal is to see, with all that mobile device data that I have, all that positioning data, is there enough signal in GPS data to do the same thing? Can I take the same neural net and put mobile device data in and get the same predictive qualities? So that's our next step. That's what we're working on right now. The challenge with mobile device data is the penetration rate. So I can do really well on highways, but will I do well on arterials and lower level roads? So is there enough signal? Don't know yet. That's our next step.
Can I ask how long is your training data collect through several months?
Yeah. Yeah, we took a year's worth of PEMS data and trained it across.
What's the accuracy of this prediction?
3 miles per hour.
The accuracy, like 90%, 95% accurate?
Don't know.
No.
We're just matching it to the PEMS data. Right. So now let's talk about link model actors. So the simulation that we introduced is a link. So the actors, you hear about agent-based modeling. Agents are usually vehicles on a network. This simulation, the links are the actors, and the links mediate the vehicles across the link. And that's where our data-driven approach will come in, where we want to inform that model. So we take a regular map, we turn it into unidirectional links, we add height to it, because we're eventually going to do an energy calculation. And we started out with a BPR function. We know that's not correct. We know this needs to be better. That's the intent of bringing real-world dynamics into the link actor. So we started just with BPR. We don't even like to say BPR because everybody goes, oh, that's not right. And we know that, but we're working to fix it. Not fix it, but upgrade it. So our goal is to take real-world dynamics and inform those links about how people engage on that link. And this is an example of a trace that we have where the speed is a congested speed. So I want to be able to have that notion on that link so that when I do energy calculations, they actually reflect the real energy use. Really key part, we are not modeling demographics, choice of transit over personal vehicles, lane level dynamics. So we don't do any of that. This is a pure engineering approach to how you use the resources given a specific demand. We are not at any point going to get into contextualization of transit demand, of vehicle demand, of human behavior. That is not part of the world that we're operating in. But these links have definitive patterns. These are some work we did earlier where you can see seasonal changes in lengths. This is summer season, this is winter season, this is speed in a neighborhood that gets a lot of tourism. So there's lots of link dynamics that you consider. They can have seasonal, they can have weekly patterns, and they tend to cluster. So that's what we're looking at, how we take this data and integrate that into the simulation approach. So the next question is, how do we get this simulation and run so fast, right? So we do this thing called, what we call optimistic parallel discrete event simulation. So typically, simulators like MatSim and other simulations, they use shared memory approaches, right? So the time step is defined by the next time step, shortest time step. So everybody kind of goes at the same pace, right? So everybody talks to each other and everybody moves along. What we do is we partition all of the activity across nodes on the supercomputer. And what we do is we let everybody go until we get a causal constraint. And then we roll it all back, fix the causal constraint, and move forward. That's how we achieve the 1 minute, 3 minute simulation times. We use the tools is GasNet, which is a supercomputer tool that it was built inside the laboratory, I believe, and Devastator. Devastator is a simulation engine that was created at Lawrence Berkeley Labs, and it was initially created for doing grid modeling. And so we said, grid modeling, transportation network modeling, kind of the same, except for my electrons have O's and E's, right? So we need to modify it a little bit, and that's what we did. So we started with something that was already built. That is how we were able to do this in 2 years, was we started with this foundational approach that they had been using for grid modeling. This is the demand profile for the Bay Area. So this is the SF-CTA model. So as I said, the city of San Francisco, who sits right here, they model this entire Bay Area to understand what the demand is on their city. Because if you don't fill the system up, you're not going to get the dynamics that you expect to get. So that's the demand model that we're using. And then this is the Pure GL tool, by the way. And then this is the result of it, where we have basically the result of the simulation is speed and flow and energy consumption. So the next question you might ask is, how would you control that? I don't know. So we've got all these people running out all at different times during the day, and now we've got infrastructure, we've got ramp meters, we've got rear and lesser signs, we've got signal controls, so we've got the infrastructure side the government's trying to run. And who pops up but the dynamic routers? Right? I was part of that. I was here. We had a dynamic routing algorithm. So they're doing active control too. So now we've got 2 players doing active control. We actually have 3, because we all have knowledge-based systems that we're doing active control with. So you've got these complex interactions happening, and it used to be just fine. There was plenty of room on the road. There was plenty of capacity. But if you go to the Bay Area today, there's no capacity anymore. If you go to LA, there's no capacity anymore. So the urbanization, urban growth, it is getting a dense pack out there. And it's going to be an issue. Well, it is an issue already. It's a productivity issue. It's a an economic issue. It's a recruitment issue. You do not have that problem here, I've noticed. We just drove down the road and I didn't see anybody at all. But it is going to be a huge problem in the big cities if it's not already. In the Bay Area, I would claim it already is. So now what to do? As I said, we've got these 2 competing activities where, you know, we decide what we're doing, there's the dynamic routing. And then let's add the complexity, as if you've got connected automated vehicles, which I don't believe is going to happen in the very near future, but suppose you did, how do you tell them where to go? So it's something that we have to start thinking about now, because it's not easy to do. So now we've got ways popping up in the middle of it all, and how do we all work together? So the complexity, and I'm sure you've read all the stories about ways running people into neighborhoods, and neighborhoods closing their doors. In New Jersey, an entire city just said you can't drive here between the hours of 7:30 and 9 in the morning, and between the hours of 4:30 and 6. So they won't even let you drive in their city. The gas station people probably there don't like that, right? Because their business is being impacted. But the safety of the citizens is being impacted by all these people coming down these small roads, looking at their phone, trying to figure out they don't know where they are. And so there's a safety issue that has sprung up. In Los Angeles, they had dynamic routing algorithms, I'm not calling anybody out in particular, that directed people right into the heart of the fire when they had the fires there, because the infrastructure and their representation of the world didn't align. So we've got some concerns here on how we manage this process. And the takeaway here, the Waze, the Googles, all the different providers of dynamic routing are not doing the wrong thing. Active routing is good. It makes the best use of your resources. But we really need to understand, how do we want to use the resources? Do we want to say that residential neighborhoods are off limits during certain times of day? I got routed past a grade school at 8 o'clock in the morning one time. I was in a neighborhood I didn't know. The sun was in my eyes. There were kids popping out of minivans everywhere. I did not belong there. And I'm sure there were other people on the same route I was, trying to get out of the clogged arterial that I was in. So it's a safety issue. It's an active routing is good, but it just needs to be done with thought and consideration, and it's a hard problem. So in our simulation now, what we do is we can implement active routing so that we can try to start simulating that behavior and start understanding what the impact is on our networks and on energy. So this simulation basically allows the vehicles, the link is the actor. Vehicles are events that happen on the link, and the vehicles can reroute anytime they hit an intersection. So you can set that to every 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you want. And so then you can look at what the emergent behavior is from that. And so this is an example where we were able to look at what the traffic demand was, how many reroutes per hour would happen in that situation, and what the average time saved per reroute was. So now you can start quantifying the impact of dynamic routing. Validation, every simulation is fiction unless you have some mechanism to validate it. This is why we don't do human behavior in our simulation, because I cannot validate that in any way, shape, or form. So this is our mobility traffic analysis zone map. We take Uber traffic analysis zone movement data, so that's how long does it take me to get from one zone to the next. We overlap those. The problem space is 719 million because it's a 24-hour day, and we get about an 8 million overlap on that, and so we're trying to push our simulation down to try to get close to what Uber says happens in a day. This isn't old data, and we're doing better as we go forward. Then we also have, I don't know what that is. We also have speed data that we get from Uber. So I'm getting a feed of the Bay Area speed data so that I can map that against my speed values to try to determine how close we are to reality. I talked about energy. So now we have an energy a mechanism to determine the energy budget for all this behavior on the network. We take dynamometer testing data from Argonne National Lab. We take GPS traces. I don't know about the accuracy of this at all. We have to learn it. We don't know if it will work. But that's one of the concerns I have on this. But we want to get a sense of the energy budget of all these vehicles moving on the network. So we take those dynamometer testing data. We're using long short-term memory neural nets to try to figure out what instantaneous fuel consumption looks like. We're also using random forest approach to this, trying to combine the two. And then we have, for validation, professor at UC Berkeley puts vehicles out on the road with very careful fuel consumption measurements. So we're going to take that data and compare it to this data to see if this data-driven approach to fuel consumption will actually work. So then, from these trajectories that we get, then we can start doing kind of what the energy budget looks like with a variety of mix of vehicles on the road that you can just arbitrarily define in the simulation. Finally, I mentioned that our roots for our simulation came from grid modeling. So you can imagine at some point you might want to do co-simulation of transportation demand on the grid as EVs get higher penetration. So we're working, this is a project at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. It's a sponsored project to try to do a co-simulation between the grid modeling and the transportation modeling so that we can start thinking about different ways of managing the energy needs of EVs, because right now it's either all at the O or all at the D, right? And if we can get to the point where we can have a 5-minute fill up, where would you put those charging stations, for example? So that's the story. I think I'm done. That most of this really hard work has been done by these brilliant scientists. So Sai-Chan did the transportation modeling work. Ben Wang did the energy modeling. John Bashan is the magician underneath that makes the supercomputer do all this parallel discrete event simulation such that you can control all of those processors and their communications. So did the wizards at LVL. Prasanna Prakash and Tanvi Malik and Eric Rask are Argonne, and they did the diffusion convolution neural net work and are the ones that are going to take the probe data and try to put that into the neural net. So you can look them up if you want to get more. There's several papers, a couple of papers been written here, a couple of, there's a paper in the works here, but I'm happy to share information on this work if you're interested. So thank you for your attention. I appreciate it, and hopefully it was of interest.
So I think the key component of your process of the simulation, and you have multiple models inside of your simulation model. So what is the kind of key simulation component of your system? So you are simulating many things like a group network, and based on the traffic demand, you have to kind of assign that to the. So there should be lots of different modules inside of your whole system.
Yeah.
So what is kind of most difficult to drive for real data because of the data problem or some mathematical problem, or what is the critical component? So I think it's 2 questions I'm asking right now.
Let me see if I can find, I didn't put a really key diagram in there that might answer that question. So let me just throw this up right here. So this is kind of the framework, if you will. I for a new, better graphic because it's really fuzzy. So I apologize for this, because the resolution of the picture isn't good. But basically, there's the kind of the sense reality piece, and then there's the predicted performance piece. So that's the simulation piece over here, right? But what we learned as we were starting to build this is the simulation is a piece of a bigger framework. So I want to be able to bring demand data and map data together and put that into a simulation model over here. That same map and demand data can be used for traffic assignment models. So it's really a framework now, right? That I can swap in the approach I want to solve the problem. So I can do a simulation model, which is kind of the emergent behavior look at things, or I can do a traffic assignment model, which is more of the optimization side of things. Those are two different, very different computational approaches, but yet they live in the same framework of I need demand data, I need map data, and then we have energy estimates that are feeding those link models so that I can start doing energy estimation on each link. And then the diffusion convolution neural net stuff is intended to inform these link models in here.
So can I consider the link model as the kind of center for controlling all the models and components?
Yeah, that,
Kind of center of the.
yes, that's kind of the heart of it all, is right here, the link models and the routing and the underneath part, which is the parallel discrete fit simulator. Even in the traffic assignment model, the dynamic traffic assignment model, we do an optimized route assignment, an iterative optimized route assignment, and then we push it through the discrete event simulator for a period of time, get the residual demand, add the new demand, do it again. So simulation is core to that piece as well. And we had to change the simulation code so that the code could halt, right, across all these processors, report its residual demand, get a new demand, and go again.
Like a 2-hour window.
A 2-hour window right now.
So which part of the model is kind of hard to kind of, so you have to draw the parameters and things for all these models from the real data. So what is your kind of, how much are you confident about those data also? Is there any kind of problem with some training some of those models from the real data?
Of course, yes. This is a 2-year-old project that's doing a massive amount of work under the hood. So we are in the beginnings of tuning this process, right? If you want to do another city, for example, you need to replace the demand data, you need to replace the map data, and do this work, which is turn it into a new map for this, and add height if you're interested in energy. And the link models, I don't know where we're going on that yet. We need to understand this better. But if you look at a meso simulation, a link model goes, I started at the beginning, and then in delta t I got here at the end of the link, and I went an average speed of 20 miles per hour. That will not get you to good energy estimates, and it won't get you to a sense of what's really going on out there.
And your primary data source is GPS data.
The primary, well, we're using PEMS data, we're using GPS data. We're hoping that we will learn from the connected corridor data what traffic signals do to the link dynamics, because we have a storage model, but we don't go down to the lane level dynamics. We don't do car following. We're noodling around what level of signal we need to do to still get an understanding. I don't want to model everything on the planet, right? So we need to figure out what level we need to get to do our job, and our job is to understand how to control the dynamics on the network better. So weather signals, yes, signals disrupt traffic, but maybe at energy level I care, but maybe at the control level I don't. You know, that kind of, we need to understand that. There are bigger questions that we need to answer. Is I have a resource, I have a road network resource. How do I use it most effectively? And can I understand the dynamics well enough that I can then start designing multimodal solutions to that demand in context of that network? Because I'll see that demand emerge, and then I can start to really think about new design approaches to multimodal solutions. So I think there's a lot of different perspectives we can go at this. We're not intending to do all of them. The goal here is that we'll be able to bring this out to everybody else, all the brilliant people here, and you can put your spin onto this approach. And you'll have a tool that runs in minutes. That's the long-term idea.
Out of curiosity, I have a question about, do you guys have also considered the capacity of the low level? Like if you have the demand residues, like then you rerouting the vehicles to another route, do you think that will impact over time of that route dynamically as well?
Yes. That's the whole idea, is to.
So you guys have the data about the capacity of the road network?
Yeah,
of each
that's
route?
all built in. Yeah, it's a storage model. You can't put any more in there than it will fit.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain again about how you guys parallel like the computing process? I didn't understand.
So all of the activity happens on each core on the machine. So I've got 100 and however many cores we're running. And all the dynamics happen until someone goes off into another core and they've gotten ahead of that core in time. So traffic moves across, and then the other core says, you're ahead of me, you gotta roll back until I can catch up with you. So it's a kind of a causal time constraint.
So you guys will have, the output will be like geophysics area of the LA.
Right.
And will be, each of them will have their own core.
Yes. So everybody operates kind of independently until they can't. Right.
Is that changing all time, or that
Yeah.
will be physics, that will be like fixed, like the analyzed zone? Will like the area one core can handle is like the fixed area, or it's changing all the time?
Right. So each core has a little chunk of the network, and it's fixed. It's not changing.
Okay.
Yeah. And that magic all happens underneath.
Right. I know we all want this to continue for a long time, but we're at time. Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you, everyone.
Look forward to more discussion.